Cloning quotes is a basic feature that most Salesforce users need when using quotes within Salesforce. It is a highly requested feature that has over 700 votes, yet it still has not been natively implemented by Salesforce. My name's Justin, and today I will be showing you how to build a flow to clone quotes within Salesforce. And if you're just looking to install this package, check the links down below to get the latest version of this package. With that, let's jump into a quick demo. We'll say, for instance, I have this quote here. What I want to do is I want to clone these quote line items. I want to go and have some sort of quote version, and I want to be able to generate quotes quickly. With this clone quote button, what I am able to do is quickly go and redirect to this new quote, and we'll have a new version. We'll have these same quote line items, and all the details will carry over. If you want to learn more, stick around and find out how. There are 3 things that you need to get this flow up and running. The first thing you need is you'll need to go and enable quotes within Salesforce. The next thing we'll be doing is we'll be going and implementing a custom field called next quote version, which will allow the incrementing of the quote version. The final thing that we'll need is we'll need Enterprise Edition. Enterprise Edition is necessary for one minor feature that allows us to redirect the page. That being said, you do not need Enterprise Edition to run flows, so I will discuss further how you can go and not include this. So if you are using Professional, you can still work with this. With that, let's go ahead and enable quotes. So to do that, let's go inside of Setup. We're going to search for Quote Settings. And from here, it's a simple button of Enable Quotes. This may already be enabled in your org. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to the quote object, and we're going to go and create the custom field. So we're going to create a new field, and it's going to be of type number. And the field label will be next quote version. I like to keep the length to 3, decimal places at 0. We're going to have a default value of 2, and we'll continue on. With that, we're ready to go and jump into the flow. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the flow section. I'm going to select new flow. And this specific flow will be a screen flow. So with that, we're inside the flow builder. The first thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to get the quote and the quote line items within the flow. But before we can do that, we need to go and pass the record ID that we'll be working with into the flow. If we go ahead and toggle the toolbox on the left side, we can create a new resource to go and get the record ID from. In this case, we'll be using an action or a button. But if we create a new resource, we'll need a resource type of variable. The API name, keep in mind that this is going to be case sensitive, is going to be record ID. The I is capitalized. The data type is going to be text. And most importantly, we'll want to check this available for input button. The next thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to save this flow. The reason for that is that flows can be very frustrating, and it's best practice to go and save after every element, or frequently. And so while you're following along, if you are watching the YouTube video for too long, you might lose your session cookies and be forced to go and restart. So I recommend saving the flow right away and saving often. The next part is the flow label. I'm going to call this quote clone flow, and the API name will of course be quote clone flow with underscores instead of spaces. Now, the next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to add an element of get record. We'll want to call this get quote. We'll get the quote object, and the condition will be the ID, specifically the quote ID, equals the variable we just created, the record ID. Additionally, we want to get the quote line items. So we'll call a get records. We'll call this get quote line items. The object is going to be quote line items. And the field is going to be quote ID equals this quote from get quote ID, the quote ID here. Now, it's also important to note we have this section down here called how many records to store. We want to ensure that all records are stored here. This way we can go and iterate through them later. The next thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to go and create formulas for the versioning and the name of the quote. The reason for this is twofold. First of all, most likely you're not starting off with a brand new instance of Salesforce. And because of that, when you create a new field with a default value, this default value only applies for records that you create moving forward. In lieu of this, we need to go and account for null values within the quote, next quote version. So I'll show you how to do that with these resources. Additionally, we'll want to go and create some sort of formula that allows us to go and create quotes, the quote name, using the underscore V with the incremented version. And not only that, we'll want to, of course, increment the quote version after it has been created. So first thing we'll want to do is create the next quote version. So we're going to create a formula. We're going to call this next quote version. The data type is going to be a number. Keep in mind you want 0 decimal places. And the formula I have here is we have the get quote from originally. We have the next quote version, which is the custom field we just created. And we're checking to see if that's null. So if it is null, we're going to assume that it's 2. Otherwise, we're just going to use the quote version. The next piece of this is we want the quote version incremented. So we're going to create a new resource of formula. We're going to have an API name of quote version incremented. The data type is going to be a number. We'll again want 0 decimal places. And the formula that we're going to be using here is that next quote version from the formula we just created plus 1. The final variable that we'll be creating is the quote name formula. So again, we can create a resource type of formula. We can have the API name of quote name. We'll want the data type of text. And we'll use this formula here that goes and looks at the quote name. Now, this is a pretty intense formula, so let me break down exactly what this does. So the first thing that we do is we look to see if we have this underscore V for the versioning. And if that's true, then we execute this section. So if it's true, then what we do is we take the left of what is the underscore V minus 1, and we give the next quote version. Otherwise, we take the left of 250. Keep in mind that you can have a quote name of up to 255 characters. We have a 3-character limit. We have 3 versions, so you can have up to 999 versions of a quote. So we need to take the left of that to be aware of string boundaries, and then we append the version. With that, it's time to go create the quote records. So the next piece of this is creating the quote record that will be the cloned record. So we're going to use a create records element. We're going to call this create quote. We want to create one record, and we want to ensure that this use separate resources and literal values is selected. Additionally, we'll go ahead and use the quote object. From here, we can go ahead and configure the quote object. Keep in mind that a few things are required. The first is, of course, the name. So we'll go ahead and use our quote name formula. The next is every quote needs to be associated to an opportunity. So we'll include the get quote and the opportunity ID. From here, we can go and add the effective date, expiration date, and so we can do that through mapping the dates through every field here. Additionally, we'll want our incremented version. So if we type in the quote, next quote version, that will of course be the quote version incremented. And finally, we will want to ensure that the price book to is set on this quote. So we can again do this using this mapping here. From here, any additional fields that you would want to map, you're more than free to do so. For instance, we have a description field that we can map. Any additional fields that you may feel like you need to map, custom shipping field, custom contact information, you can go and set through this quote, through this section here. Next, we're going to go ahead and create the quote line items. I recommend going through a loop to go and iterate through all of the line items. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add a loop element. We'll call this loop through quote line items. And the collection variable is going to be this quote line item. Keep in mind that if you do not see this, the reason why is that you forgot to select this as a collection in the get quote line items records. Now the direction does not matter. In fact, I'd recommend keeping it first to last. And now we'll go ahead and create the quote line items. So to create the quote line items, we'll be creating a create records inside this for each loop. We'll go ahead and add the label of create quote line items. We want to create one. We want to again use separate resources and literal values. And we want this to be quote line item. From here, again, it is quite straightforward. There are a few fields that we must add. The first one, of course, is we need a parent quote. So we'll add the quote ID here. And we'll look for this quote ID from create quote. Keep in mind, if you use this quote ID from get quote, you'll be creating new line items on your old quote. The next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to have a quantity. So we'll go ahead and do this from the get quote. And this will be all fields moving forward. Sorry, not the get quote, the get line items. Additionally, we'll want the sales price or the unit price. And finally, we'll want the price book entry ID. This is different from the product ID, but you can bring it over through your quote line item. And from here, any additional fields you are free to map. For instance, if you want to add the description, then you can do so here using the get quote and description. And any additional custom fields that you have on the quote line item, feel free to go and add here. And with that, this is everything you need to basically create a quote. We'll be additionally adding some checks in the future, but this is the skeleton that you need. So the next add-on that we'll be tackling is we'll be going and redirecting the page to the newly created record after the flow is complete. We can do this using Lightning Web Components. Keeping in mind that Lightning Web Components are a feature that are of enterprise, and so you will need enterprise to go and implement this. That being said, how do we go and add Lightning Web Components to our org? And what Lightning Web Component do we need? First of all, I would like to shout out Sebastiano Schwartz. He wrote a good article on how to do this. And so if you're looking for more of the technicals and why certain things were done, I'd check out his article. That being said, we do need to go and have VS Code and SFDX installed to create Lightning Web Components. If you need VS Code and SFDX installed on your machine, check out the links above to go and install that yourself. But I already have this set up, so I'm going to assume that you're at this point here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run a command to go and create the Lightning Web Component. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to press Control-Shift-P to run a command, and you're going to run this command, create Lightning Web Component. The desired file name is going to be open record play page flow action. Keep in mind that this is again case sensitive. It's critical that the O in open is lowercase and every other word is uppercase. We're going to go ahead and press enter a few more times, and we have a brand new Lightning Web Component. The next thing that we'll be doing is we'll be going and essentially copying the code that Sebastiano wrote. Thanks again for writing this. So I'll go ahead and copy the JavaScript code here. So you can see the JavaScript here. Again, I think Sebastiano goes into this in detail, but essentially this is a easy way to redirect to the new record ID. Additionally, we do have the target of blank or self, which allows you to go and open in a new tab or in the same window. The next thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to add the HTML to this Lightning Web Component. So I'll do so here. And here we have the HTML for the Lightning Web Component. Keep in mind that the HTML here is it's not critical, but you do need something in here. And the final thing is we need the XML. So I will go ahead and input the XML here. And this XML goes and defines what it is that this Lightning Web Component will do and where it's available. So a couple critical things. We have the exposed equals true, the target being the Lightning flow screen, and the target config allowing us to go and pass the variables from the flow into the Lightning Web Component. With that, I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. You can do that doing Control-Shift-P and pressing deploy this to source. After this is deployed, you should see the messaging here that your HTML, JavaScript, and XML are created. So you're good to go. And so now we're going to go back to the flow screen, and we're going to go ahead and implement this redirect. So we need a screen element to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and add a screen. I'm going to call this screen end screen. And critically, you should see the component down on the left. If you don't see the component down on the left like I don't, that means you need to refresh the flow screen. So we'll go ahead and press done. We'll go ahead and press save. That way we don't lose our work. And once this is saved, we'll refresh, go back to the end screen. And you should see down at the bottom under this custom open record page component. From here, we can go and set the config. So we'll have the API name be the record redirect. We'll have the record ID set to the new quote ID. So this quote ID from create quote. And we want the target to be underscore self. You can read more about the differences between here, the self and blank here. With that, we have the end screen created. So again, you can go and create quotes and voila. So now that your quote clone flow is up and running, let's show how to get this in the UI. I'm going to go ahead and activate this. That way we can go and incorporate it in a button. From here, we'll need to go back and create the button itself. So we'll go to Object Manager, quote, buttons, links, and actions. We'll go ahead and press new action. The action type will be flow. It'll be this quote clone flow, and we'll call this clone quote. From here, we'll go back to the quote object, and we'll go to the page layout. And now we can go and add it to our page layout. If you have not customized the section here, you'll need to click this wrench, and then you can go to mobile and lightning actions, and you can drag this clone quote to wherever you want this in your order. You can save, and voila, now this is on the quote layout. Now that we have the quote flow up and running and we're able to clone quotes, we want to add 2 more checks to ensure that our flow is bulletproof. Those 2 checks is we want to ensure that quotes are not cloned if there are no quote line items attached, and we want to ensure that there are active price book entries on a quote. If there are inactive price book entries on a quote line item, you will receive an error. So with that, let's tackle how to check the quote line item size first and prevent quotes from being cloned if there are no quote line items. I'm going to go ahead and create a new resource, a variable called QLI size. This is going to be a number. Decimal places is going to be 0. And that's all we need to do there. The next thing we're going to do is after the get quote line items, we're going to add an assignment. This assignment is going to be called assign QLL size, and we're going to set the variable of the QLI size to the equals count of the quote line item collection. The next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to create a decision branch. We'll do that by going to add element, decision, and we'll call this decision branch QLI size decision. Next, we'll want to go and label outcomes. The first outcome is going to be no QLIs. We're going to go ahead and look for the QLI size equals 0. From here, we have our first branch. Go ahead and add an end element. Keep in mind you can't search for this. Now, while this is good, it would be nice to go and have some sort of nice, cozy UI that the end user can understand. So let's go ahead and add a screen. We'll call this screen QLI's DNE screen. We'll go ahead and add display text to this. We'll call this display text QLI DNE text. And inside this box here, we'll add the message that we will display to the end user. And with that, we have the QLI check done. The next thing that we'll want to do is we want to check and see if the price book entries on every single quote line item exist. We can do that using a similar method that we used before. What we can do is we can query inactive price book entries. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to get the product IDs of every quote line item. We can do that using a variable resource. We can call this product2IDs. We want the data type to be text. We want to ensure that allow multiple values is selected. Next, we'll want to go and loop through all of the quote line items to assign them to the product2IDs. What we can do is we can create a loop after the decision and before the create quote. We can call this loop QLI loop. We want to iterate over the quote line item record. So what we can do is inside the for each, we can add an assignment, call this product2assignment. And with the product2IDs collection variable, we can add the quote line item, the product ID from the quote line item from this. So if we search for quote line item, this is the QLI loop, and we want to look for the product2ID here. Then after this, we want to go and query for the price book entries. We can do this through a get records element, call this get inactive pricebook entries. We're going to be searching for pricebook entry. We're going to be saying the product ID is in the product 2 IDs. We want to do is active equals false, and the pricebook 2 ID equals the quote pricebook. With that, we have the inactive pricebook entries, and we'll be doing a similar thing with the QLIs to the pricebook entry count. So we'll want to go and create a new resource called variable, call it PBE size, and this will be a number. We'll have the decimal places set to 0, and this will store the list size of the pricebook entries. Next, we'll go ahead and assign this. Again, keep in mind that you want to be above the create quotes element. So we'll go ahead and assign the PBE size, and we'll do this by going and getting the PBE size variable, and this is going to be the equals count of the quote line items collection variable down at the bottom. Now we can go ahead and create a decision tree like we did before. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add a decision element. We'll call this check PBE size. We'll call this inactive PBEs exist. And that's going to be if the PBE size is greater than 0. With that, we can do what we did again with the previous, where we can go and add the end element. And additionally, we'll want to go and create some sort of haptic feedback to the user so they understand what is going on. This can be done through screens. So I'm going to go ahead and create a screen. We're going to call this screen PBE exists screen. And we'll want to go and display nice text to the end user. We can do that with the display text. We can have the API name of PBE air text. And I like the messaging down below here. Now, that being said, this is more helpful to the user because we can go and see that they're inactive pricebook entries, but the end user doesn't know which pricebook entries are here, which could be a problem if there's hundreds of line items. So what we can do is we can add a data table element to show this. So we'll add an API name of inactive PBE data table. We'll have the label as inactive PBEs. We'll actually use the label as the title. Now the source collection will be the pricebook entries. Now you can see that I forgot that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the get inactive pricebook entries. Remember, this needs to be all records. So back to creating the screen. So now that we are where we were, I can go ahead and add the source collection of the pricebook entries, and we can configure columns. We do need at least one column, and I would recommend the name of the product. That way then you can go and clearly display the name. Obviously you could go and add any column names that you deem worthy of showing to the end user. And with that, we've concluded the tutorial on how to clone quotes within Salesforce using flows. If you enjoyed this content and you've made it this far, I would greatly appreciate it if you could go and leave a thumbs up as well as subscribe. It really helps me go and know that this content is appreciated, and it will help me produce more. With that, thanks and have a good day.